Sometimes I think to myself, what are you waiting for, you dumb, stupid fuck?
The next station will be Fortuna 69.
You might be wondering why I'm devoting a single video to just a single ability. Well, originally this was supposed to be an hour-long video of me playing Vauban with an experimental build, and although I am still going to upload that video at a later date, I had some thoughts I wanted to express first. To put it bluntly, honestly, you should never, ever, under most if not all circumstances, use Photon Strike. I'm not calling it bad. I'm really not. However, there's just really not much reason in my opinion to use it. As I've stated previously numerous times, Tesla Bank is incredibly good because it's a powerful augment for a very cheap ability, not to mention that it one-shots almost any enemy without armor in the game, without demanding power strength from the player. Not all players use augments in their builds, but if you had to take one for Vauban, Tesla Bank would be your best bet most of the time, purely because it's really good. Can you do well with Photon Strike? Sure, it's possible. However, using it isn't exactly a good way to utilize your energy, especially as Vauban. If you've played Call of Duty in the past, you might understand this metaphor. Photon Strike is basically the Uzi from the first Black Ops. Can you do well with it? Technically, yes. Is using it advised? Not really, no. And yes, I know, some of you might be calling me retarded for saying that Photon Strike isn't a good usage of your energy, especially since Photon Repeater exists. That sounds tempting, I know. As long as you know how to group enemies, Photon Repeater would allow you to technically use Photon Strike forever, which basically equates to free damage. On paper, that's excellent. Again, on paper, that's excellent. In practice, Photon Repeater isn't a very good usage of a slot in your build because
1.
You have a better option for an augment.
2.
Photon Strike can only be used in close range because it has a fast detonation time. If you're within range to use Photon Strike, why wouldn't you just shoot enemies instead of burning energy?
3.
You have better choices than Photon Strike for dealing AoE damage. Here are a few examples. My point so far is that for what it costs, there's no point to using Photon Strike when you would be better off just shooting enemies instead. Considering that corrosive weapons have been meta for literally years now, that's even more reason to not use Photon Strike, especially against enemies with armor. Speaking of armor, it's very obvious that Photon Strike is intended to be used as a combo ability with Bastille, because otherwise DE wouldn't have made it so Bastille turns into Vortex for a few seconds at the end of its duration. The original purpose they put in place was throw Bastille, group enemies into a ball, throw Photon Strike. Honestly, that just seems very shoehorned. It might seem weird that a quote-unquote orbital strike ability works for Ember but not Vauban, but trust me, there's several reasons why. Ember's Inferno is line of sight, meaning that she doesn't have to run into close range in order to use her ability. Even if she does have to, she can use Immolation to grant herself damage reduction, whereas Vauban only has the 1000 armor buff from Bastille. Ember's Inferno is capable of dealing damage while also keeping enemies CC'd due to the panic effect of heat rocks, which also allow enemy armor to be stripped at the same time. Vauban is indeed also capable of stripping enemy armor with Bastille, but he can't capitalize on his damage as well as Ember can because unlike Ember, he can't just look at enemies and press a button. Since Photon Strike explodes almost immediately after being thrown, it can only be used at close range, and only if enemies are grouped up. Because of this, Vauban has to spend more energy on using Vortex just to actually be able to use Photon Strike, but at that point, you would literally be better off just using your weapons, and given that we have Riven mods, your guns can potentially outdamage Photon Strike. Ember's Inferno can deal more damage based on how filled up Ember's Immolation gauge is. Although Photon Strike scales up with enemy level and is also affected by Vauban's passive, it doesn't perform as well against enemies with armor, especially once you start playing against enemies higher than level 80. Once you do, you're forced to use Bastille into Vortex in order to actually get the most out of Photon Strike's damage. To be honest, that's just an unnecessary usage of energy for an ability that's more flashy than useful. If Photon Strike did something more than damage, I would use it over Tesla Bank or literally anything else that can deal damage. If it could leave behind an AoE that either applied CC or dealt damage, I would use it. In its current state of throw for boom, it's just not worth it. The augment's not bad, it's just that Photon Strike itself pales in comparison to a bunch of already existing options. If I still don't make much sense, I'll put it to you like this. Why would you ever do this? When you could just do this. Photon Strike doesn't necessarily need more damage. In my opinion, Photon Strike would be great if it were capable of creating an AoE zone that applies radiation procs on enemies, similar to how Concuss did before. Because Photon Strike is best used against enemies with no armor, allowing it to create an AoE radiation field would mean that any enemies who survive Photon Strike's blast would be forced into killing each other, and given that they wouldn't have any armor at all, this would actually make Photon Strike less of an average ability. That's just me, though. Thank you for watching.